The morning sun peeked through the blinds as Janelle Thompson brushed her daughter's hair. "Hold still, baby," she said gently, working through a small tangle. At just 6, little Zoe was already full of questions about the world. "Mommy, why do you have to work today? It's Saturday," Zoe asked, her small fingers playing with a worn teddy bear. "Because Saturdays are busy days at the restaurant, and busy days mean better tips," Janelle explained, tying the last ribbon in Zoe's hair. She glanced at the clock. 6:45 a.m. Her mother would arrive any minute to watch the kids. Janelle's son, Andra, already 9 and fiercely independent, walked into the living room with his backpack. "I packed my own lunch," he announced proudly. "Let me see," Janelle said with a smile, opening his lunchbox to find 3 chocolate pudding cups and a bag of chips. "How about we add a sandwich and some apple slices to that?" A knock at the door announced her mother's arrival. "There's my grandbabies." The older woman's voice filled the apartment with warmth as she hugged the children. "Thanks for watching them, Mom," Janelle said, grabbing her purse and the one notebook where she kept track of her savings. Every extra dollar went into the college fund jar on top of the fridge. The bus ride to Riverside Bistro took 30 minutes. Janelle used the time to review her nursing textbook. 3 years of night classes, and she was halfway to her degree. The thought gave her strength on mornings like this when her feet already ached before her shift began. The restaurant stood tall and elegant near the city's financial district, its large windows reflecting the morning light. Inside, the marble floors and crystal chandeliers created an atmosphere of luxury that contrasted sharply with the staff entrance, where Janelle slipped in, nodding to the security guard. "Morning, Pete," she said, heading to the locker room. "Morning, Janelle. Heard we got some VIPs coming in for lunch today," Pete replied. In the staff room, Janelle changed into her crisp white shirt and black pants, carefully pinning her name tag. The manager, Mr. Benson, was already briefing the morning staff. "The Henderson party will be at table 7. The mayor's secretary called to confirm brunch at 11. And ladies," he said, his eyes scanning the room, "Mrs. Prescott and her friends have reserved the window table at 1. You all know how particular she can be." A collective groan went through the room. Victoria Prescott was infamous among the staff for her impossible standards and poor tipping. "Who's taking that table?" asked Darlene, an older waitress who had been there for decades. Mr. Benson checked his list. "Thompson." Janelle's heart sank, but she kept her expression neutral. She needed this job, and more importantly, she needed the tips from the other tables to make up for what Mrs. Prescott would surely stiff her on. The morning passed in a blur of coffee refills and breakfast orders. By noon, Janelle had already earned enough in tips to cover Andrew's upcoming school field trip. She was wiping down a recently vacated table when she heard the distinctive click of expensive heels on marble. Looking up, she saw Victoria Prescott and 2 equally well-dressed women being escorted to the window table. Mrs. Prescott was impossible to miss. Her designer clothes probably cost more than Janelle's rent, and her diamond earrings caught the light with every tilt of her head. Taking a deep breath, Janelle straightened her shirt and put on her most professional smile. She had dealt with difficult customers before. This was just another day, another table, another step toward the future she was building for her children. But as she approached the table, the look of immediate disdain in Victoria Prescott's eyes told Janelle that this wouldn't be just another table. Something about today felt different, like the air before a storm. Still, she kept her smile firmly in place as she greeted the women. "Good afternoon, ladies. Welcome to Riverside Bistro. My name is Janelle, and I'll be your server today. Can I start you off with something to drink?" Little did she know that this ordinary beginning would lead to an extraordinary turning point in her life. Victoria Prescott barely looked up from her phone when Janelle approached the table. Her 2 friends, women with equally expensive handbags and judgmental eyes, were chatting about someone's failed marriage. "We'll have sparkling water, not tap," Victoria said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. The lunch continued with Victoria finding fault with everything: the temperature of the food, the speed of service, even the way Janelle poured water. Each criticism cut deeper, but Janelle maintained her composure. She had bills to pay and children to feed. Pride wouldn't put food on their table. "Could I get a refill on my sparkling water?" asked one of Victoria's friends, a woman with a kinder face than her companions. Right away, Janelle replied, grateful for the normal request. As she reached across the table with the water pitcher, Victoria shifted suddenly in her chair, bumping Janelle's arm. The water splashed, a few drops landing on Victoria's designer sleeve. The restaurant seemed to freeze. Even the kitchen staff, visible through the service window, paused to watch. "Oh my God!" Victoria shrieked, leaping to her feet and holding her arm as though it had been burned. "Look what you've done. This is a $3,000 blouse." "I'm so sorry, ma'am," Janelle said quickly, already reaching for her service towel. "Let me help." "Don't touch me," Victoria's voice echoed across the restaurant. This is exactly what happens when restaurants hire just anybody off the street. Conversations around them stopped. All eyes turned toward their table. "I apologize for the accident," Janelle said, her voice steady despite the hammering in her chest. "It was just a few drops of water. It should dry without." "Just a few drops?" Victoria's face contorted with rage. "Do you have any idea how much my clothes cost?" "Of course you don't. You probably shop at discount stores." Victoria's friend with the kinder face looked mortified. "Vicky, it was an accident. And it's just water." But Victoria was on a roll now, playing to the audience she'd gathered. "It's not about the water, Carol. It's about incompetence. It's about standards." Janelle stood perfectly still, her hands folded in front of her, weathering the storm. She'd faced worse in her life. She thought of her children, of the nursing textbooks waiting at home, of the future she was building one difficult day at a time. "I want to speak to your manager. Now," Victoria demanded, snatching up napkins and dramatically dabbing at her sleeve. Mr. Benson appeared almost instantly, his apologetic smile firmly in place. "Is there a problem, Mrs. Prescott?" This waitress," Victoria spat the word like it was dirty, "just ruined my blouse. I want her fired immediately." Several diners exchanged uncomfortable glances. At a corner table, an older couple shook their heads in disapproval, at Victoria, not Janelle. "Ma'am, I observed what happened," came a deep, authoritative voice. The man with salt and pepper hair that Janelle had noticed earlier stood up from his table. "Your movement caused the spill." The waitress was being perfectly careful. Victoria turned, ready to unleash her fury on this new target, but the words died on her lips when she saw him fully. Something about him made her hesitate. "This doesn't concern you," she said, but her voice had lost some of its edge. "When someone is being unfairly treated, it concerns all of us," the man replied calmly. He was well dressed in an expensive but understated suit, his presence commanding respect without demanding it. "Do you know who I am?" Victoria asked, her chin lifting. "I do," he replied simply. "The question is whether you know who I am." A flicker of uncertainty crossed Victoria's face, but she pressed on. "I don't care who you are. This establishment owes me an apology and compensation for my ruined blouse." Janelle, still standing quietly, noticed other staff watching with wide eyes. Tina from the bar was making frantic, cut-it-out gestures at Victoria, which the woman ignored. "Mrs. Prescott," Mr. Benson tried again. "I'm sure we can resolve this without." "I want her job," Victoria insisted, pointing at Janelle. "I'm on the board of 3 charities and my husband's family has connections throughout this city. If you want to keep your business reputation intact, you'll fire her now." The man with salt and pepper hair stepped closer, his expression serious but not angry. "Mrs. Prescott, before you continue making threats, let me introduce myself." Mr. Benson's eyes widened in recognition. "Dr. Washington, it's an honor to have you dining with us today. Is everything to your satisfaction, sir?" The atmosphere in the restaurant shifted instantly. Victoria's face drained of color as she heard the name. "Dr. Washington," she repeated, her voice suddenly small. Janelle looked between them, confusion replacing her embarrassment. Who was this man that could make Victoria Prescott, terror of Riverside Bistro, suddenly look like she'd seen a ghost? Dr. Washington turned to Janelle, completely ignoring Victoria now. "Miss, I'd like to speak with you privately when you have a moment. I have a proposition that might interest you." Behind Victoria, her friends were frantically typing on their phones, their expressions growing increasingly alarmed. One leaned over to whisper something in Victoria's ear. Whatever she said made Victoria sway slightly, as if her knees had weakened. The balance of power had shifted dramatically, though Janelle didn't yet understand why. She only knew that for the first time since Victoria Prescott had started frequenting the restaurant, the woman was completely speechless. And it felt like justice. Dr. Washington sat alone at his table, calmly finishing his coffee as the restaurant slowly returned to normal. Victoria and her friends had paid their bill in a rush and left, Victoria's face a mask of controlled panic. The whispered conversation between them had been intense, with much glancing back at the distinguished doctor. Janelle continued her shift, trying to focus on her other tables despite the curious glances from co-workers. Mr. Benson had assured her that her job was secure, his earlier eagerness to please Victoria replaced by almost comical deference to Dr. Washington. "Take your break now, Thompson," Mr. Benson told her, his voice unusually gentle. "Dr. Washington would like a word." Janelle nodded, untying her apron. As she approached the doctor's table, she felt a strange mix of gratitude and wariness. She'd learned long ago that unexpected help sometimes came with unexpected costs. "Please, sit down," Dr. Washington said, gesturing to the chair across from him. Up close, his eyes were kind but shrewd, assessing her with intelligence that seemed to see beneath the surface. "Thank you for speaking up, sir," Janelle said, sitting with her back straight, hands folded in her lap. "But I don't want to take up your time." "You're not," he replied, setting aside his coffee cup. "Do you know who I am, Miss Thompson?" Janelle shook her head. "No, sir. But from Mrs. Prescott's reaction, I'm guessing someone important." Dr. Washington chuckled, a warm sound that eased some of Janelle's tension. "Importance is relative. I'm the chief of medicine at City Memorial Hospital. I also serve on several medical foundation boards, including one that recently received a substantial donation from the Prescott family." Understanding dawned on Janelle. That's why she looked so scared. Indeed. His smile faded. "Mrs. Prescott's husband, Robert, is very concerned with appearances and connections. He recently joined our hospital board and has been quite vocal about his desire to climb the social ladder." Janelle shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, I appreciate your help, but I don't want to cause trouble. I need this job." "You won't lose your job," Dr. Washington said firmly. "But that's actually what I wanted to discuss with you." He leaned forward. "Your manager mentioned you're studying nursing." Janelle blinked in surprise. "Yes, part-time at community college. I've got about 2 years left if I can keep affording the classes." "I noticed how you handled yourself today," he said, his expression thoughtful. "Grace under pressure is a quality we value highly in healthcare. Not many people could maintain their composure while being treated so unfairly." "When you have kids depending on you, you learn to swallow your pride," Janelle said simply. "Children? How many?" "2. Zoe's 6, Andrew's 9. Dr. Washington nodded, seeming to make a decision. "Ms. Thompson, our hospital has a scholarship program for promising nursing students, particularly those who demonstrate exceptional character and resilience. The program includes tuition coverage and a part-time position that works around your class schedule." Janelle's heart skipped a beat, but caution kept her voice steady. "That sounds too good to be true, sir." "It's not charity," he said, seeming to read her thoughts. "The hospital invests in people who will become valuable healthcare professionals. From what I've seen today, and what your manager tells me about your work ethic, you're exactly the kind of person we want to invest in." Janelle thought of her children, of the cramped apartment, of the tip jar on the fridge that never seemed to fill fast enough. "Why would you do this for someone you just met?" Dr. Washington's expression grew serious. "When I was younger, I was often the only black doctor in the room. I know what it's like to be underestimated and overlooked. But someone took a chance on me once, my mentor, Dr. Chen. He saw potential in me that others missed." He paused. "Sometimes, all people need is for one door to open." Janelle felt tears threatening but blinked them back. She didn't cry easily, especially not in public. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll consider it," Dr. Washington replied, sliding a business card across the table. "Come to the hospital next Tuesday at 10 a.m. We'll discuss the details." In the kitchen doorway, Tina was watching with wide eyes, giving Janelle a subtle thumbs up. Mr. Benson hovered nearby, pretending to check table settings while obviously eavesdropping. "I have class Tuesday mornings," Janelle said, then shook her head with a small laugh. "But I'll reschedule. This isn't an opportunity I can pass up." Dr. Washington stood, extending his hand. Good. And Ms. Thompson, what happened today with Mrs. Prescott? That kind of behavior doesn't go unnoticed or unchallenged in my circles. As Janelle shook his hand, she realized this wasn't just about a scholarship or a job. This was about something deeper: dignity, respect, and the quiet power of standing your ground even when the odds seemed stacked against you. Thank you, Dr. Washington, she said simply. As he left the restaurant, other diners nodded respectfully to him. The hostess practically bowed, opening the door with a flourish. Who was that? Whispered one of the newer waitresses, sidling up to Janelle. Janelle looked down at the business card in her hand, feeling the weight of possibility it represented. Someone who sees people for who they really are, she replied. And across town, Victoria Prescott was frantically calling her husband, unaware that her world was about to change just as dramatically as Janelle's, though in a very different direction. Victoria paced her marble-floored living room, phone pressed to her ear, waiting for her husband to pick up. The massive chandelier above her caught the afternoon light, casting sparkles across the designer furniture that suddenly seemed like meaningless props in a life she might lose control of. "Robert, you need to call me back immediately," she hissed into his voicemail for the third time. "It's about Dr. Washington. I think I've made a terrible mistake." Her friends had filled her in on exactly who Dr. Washington was on their hurried drive home. Not just chief of medicine, but the man who had personally recommended Robert for the hospital board position he'd been bragging about for months. The same man who controlled the allocation of the new research center funds. The man whose approval Robert desperately needed for his next career move. And she had insulted a waitress in front of him. The doorbell rang, startling Victoria. Through the security monitor, she saw Carol, her friend from lunch who had tried to stop her tirade. Victoria buzzed her in. "Have you heard anything from Robert?" Carol asked without preamble, setting her purse down on the marble counter. Victoria shook her head, anxiety etched into her usually Botox-smooth forehead. "He's in meetings all day. He doesn't know yet." Carol took a deep breath. "I just got off the phone with my husband. He golfs with Dr. Washington's brother-in-law." She hesitated. "Vicky, this is bad. Really bad." "How bad?" Victoria's voice was barely a whisper. Dr. Washington's mother was a waitress. She worked double shifts to put him through medical school. And he's known for being heavily involved in diversity initiatives at the hospital. Victoria sank onto her cream-colored sofa, her legs suddenly weak. "Oh God. There's more," Carol continued, pacing now. "You remember that donation your family foundation made to the hospital?" Victoria nodded. It had been Robert's idea. A substantial contribution that had gotten their name on a small plaque in the new wing. Dr. Washington personally approves how those funds are allocated within the hospital. He can redirect it all to different departments if he wants to. The front door opened, and both women turned to see Robert Prescott entering, his face thunderous. He tossed his briefcase onto the console table with a crash. "Would you care to explain," he said with barely controlled fury, "why I just got called out of a board meeting to be told that my wife publicly humiliated a waitress in front of the most influential doctor in this city?" Victoria opened her mouth, but no words came out. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Robert continued, loosening his tie with an aggressive jerk. "Dr. Washington called the board chairman. He specifically mentioned you by name, Victoria." Carol quietly gathered her purse. "I should go. Call me later, Vicky." Neither Victoria nor Robert acknowledged her departure. "It wasn't my fault," Victoria finally managed. "She spilled water on my blouse, my Chanel blouse." Robert stared at her as if she'd grown a second head. "Your blouse? You may have torpedoed my entire career over a blouse." He ran his hands through his thinning hair. "The chairman told me that Dr. Washington specifically said he was reconsidering the values alignment between the hospital and the Prescott family." The weight of those words hung in the air. Values alignment. The polite, professional way of saying, "You don't belong in our world anymore." Victoria felt the carefully constructed facade of her life beginning to crack. The social standing she'd worked so hard to achieve, the connections she'd cultivated, the reputation she'd built, all of it suddenly threatened because she couldn't resist putting a waitress in her place. "Maybe I could apologize to him," she suggested, grasping at any solution. "Send flowers or—" "This isn't about flowers, Victoria," Robert exploded. "This is about who we are. Do you know what else the chairman told me? That waitress, the one you tried to get fired, she's being offered a scholarship through the hospital. A full ride to finish her nursing degree." Victoria's eyes widened. The waitress. Dr. Washington was apparently impressed by her grace under pressure and extraordinary dignity, his exact words. Robert's voice tripped with irony. "He's invited her to a fundraising gala next month. The same gala we were supposed to attend." "We're supposed to," Victoria repeated faintly. Robert's phone pinged. He checked it, his face growing even darker. That was the chairman's assistant. "We've been uninvited." Victoria's social world, the one thing she valued above all else, was collapsing around her. "There must be something we can do." Robert looked at her for a long moment, disappointment evident in his eyes. "Do you even understand what happened today? It's not about the spilled water or the bluffs. It's about how you treat people. Dr. Washington saw exactly who you are today, Victoria. And now, so have I." He turned and walked toward the stairs, leaving Victoria alone in their enormous, empty living room, surrounded by luxury that suddenly felt hollow. Her phone buzzed with a text notification. It was from another friend, canceling their spa appointment for the weekend. The first social domino was already falling. And somewhere across town, Janelle Thompson was telling her children about an unexpected change in their future, a change sparked by one woman's cruelty and another man's recognition of quiet strength. 2 weeks had passed since the incident at Riverside Bistro. Victoria sat alone in her home office, scrolling through her social calendar on her tablet. The screen was depressingly empty. 3 charity committee meetings had been rescheduled. 2 dinner parties had been cancelled due to unforeseen circumstances. Her usual standing appointment at the exclusive spa had somehow become fully booked for the foreseeable future. The phone rang, and Victoria pounced on it, desperate for any connection to her former life. "Hello." "Victoria, it's Patricia." The voice of the hospital charity ball chairwoman was cool and professional. Victoria sat up straighter, hope rising. "Patricia, I was just thinking about the gala next month. I wanted to discuss." "That's why I'm calling," Patricia interrupted. "We've had to make some adjustments to the seating arrangements. I'm afraid we won't be able to accommodate you and Robert at the main benefactors table this year." Victoria's knuckles turned white around the phone. "I see. And where will we be seated?" A pause. "Well, that's the thing. We're facing unprecedented demand for tickets this year. Dr. Washington's involvement has raised the profile considerably." The implication hung in the air for a moment before Victoria understood. "You're uninviting us completely." "I wouldn't put it that way," Patricia said, her voice artificially bright. "We're simply at capacity, perhaps next year." After the call ended, Victoria sat motionless, staring at the wall of photos displaying her at various social events. In each one, she was perfectly dressed, perfectly coiffed, perfectly positioned among the city's elite. A life built on appearances now crumbling because of one moment when the mask had slipped. Her husband entered the room, loosening his tie. Robert looked tired in a way Victoria had never seen before. "How was your day?" she asked tentatively. Their conversations had been strained since the incident. The board meeting was rescheduled. Again, Robert sank into a chair. "And I've been moved off the research center committee." "They can't do that," Victoria protested. "After our donation." Robert looked at her with weary eyes. "They can, and they did. Dr. Washington has made it clear that he questions my commitment to the hospital's values of respect and dignity for all people." "Because of what I did," Victoria said quietly. For once, Robert didn't argue or blame. He simply nodded. "The thing is, Victoria, I'm not sure he's wrong." The simple admission hung in the air between them, heavier than any accusation. "What do you mean?" she asked, though part of her already knew. "I've been thinking about how we live our lives, how we treat people. When did we become these people?" Robert gestured around their expensively decorated home. "I grew up with nothing. My father was a janitor. Somewhere along the way, I started believing that success meant looking down on people like him." Victoria felt tears threatening. Not for her social calendar or lost status. They walked to a small courtyard where hospital staff took breaks. The spring air was fresh and full of possibility. The hospital's annual fundraising gala is next month, Dr. Washington explained. It's our biggest event of the year. We raise money for the children's wing and the community outreach programs. Janelle nodded, wondering why he was telling her this. I'd like you to be my guest, he continued. Your story, working full-time while pursuing your education to build a better life for your children, it embodies everything our hospital stands for. Janelle blinked in surprise. Me? At a fancy gala? The board and our major donors need to see the real impact of their contributions, Dr. Washington said. And I believe some of them could benefit from your example of dignity and grace under pressure. As Janelle absorbed this unexpected invitation, Dr. Washington added casually, I also hear the Riverside Bistro has had a notable absence of certain difficult customers lately. Apparently, Mrs. Prescott hasn't been back since that day. Janelle couldn't help but smile. Tina tells me the staff has been celebrating. Dr. Washington's eyes twinkled with understated satisfaction. Justice works in mysterious ways, Ms. Thompson. Sometimes it requires a courtroom, but sometimes all it needs is for the right person to be watching at the right moment. As they walked back into the hospital, Janelle felt a profound sense of change, not just in her circumstances, but in the balance of a world that sometimes, unexpectedly, tilted toward fairness. 2 months later, Janelle hurried through the hospital corridors, her nursing textbook tucked under her arm. Her clinical training was going well, and her professors had nothing but praise for her work. The new schedule meant she could be home with her children every evening, a luxury she'd never had while waitressing. Today was special, though. She glanced at her watch, quickening her pace. Her shift had ended, but she had one more stop to make. The pediatric ward was bright with colorful murals and friendly faces. Children's artwork decorated the walls, a rainbow of hope amid the sterile hospital environment. Janelle approached the nurse's station, where her friend Tanya looked up with a smile. She's waiting for you, Tanya said, nodding toward a small activity room. Inside, a little girl with bright eyes and braided hair sat at a table, coloring intently. When she looked up and saw Janelle, her whole face lit up. Miss Janelle, you came. Of course I did, Layla, Janelle said, sitting beside the child. I promised, didn't I? Layla had been admitted 3 weeks ago with pneumonia. During her rounds, Janelle had discovered the girl was alone most days, while her single mother worked long shifts, a situation Janelle understood all too well. She'd started spending her breaks with Layla, and now visited even on days when she wasn't assigned to the pediatric floor. I made this for you, Layla said, pushing her drawing across the table. Janelle's heart melted at the crayon image, 2 stick figures, one tall with a nurse's cap, one small with pigtails, holding hands. It's beautiful. I'll hang it in my locker, Janelle promised. How are you feeling today? As Layla chattered about her improving health, Janelle noticed someone enter the room behind her. Turning, she was startled to see Victoria Prescott, dressed not in her usual designer outfit, but in a simple blouse and pants. More surprising was the volunteer badge clipped to her shirt. The 2 women stared at each other for a long moment. Mrs. Prescott, Janelle said finally, her voice carefully neutral. Victoria's face flushed slightly. Miss Thompson. I didn't know you'd be here. An awkward silence fell between them. Miss Janelle, who's that lady? Layla whispered, not quietly enough. Before Janelle could answer, Victoria stepped forward. I'm Victoria. I'm a new volunteer in the children's ward. I read stories and help with art projects. Her usual commanding tone was missing, replaced by something gentler, almost uncertain. Janelle struggled to reconcile this woman with the one who had tried to get her fired. I see. That's good of you. Victoria glanced at Layla's drawing. That's lovely. You're quite the artist. Layla beamed at the praise, innocent of the complicated history between the adults. I should go, Janelle said, rising. I'll see you tomorrow, Layla. In the hallway, Janelle was surprised when Victoria followed her out. Miss Thompson, wait. Victoria touched her arm lightly. I'd owe you an apology. Janelle turned, guarded but willing to listen. Victoria took a deep breath. What happened at the restaurant? How I treated you? It was inexcusable. I've spent these past months thinking about the kind of person I became, and I don't like her very much. Janelle crossed her arms, not making it easy but not walking away either. Dr. Washington suggested I volunteer here, Victoria continued. At first, I only did it to try to repair our social standing. But then I met these children and, for the first time, Janelle saw real emotion in Victoria's eyes. They don't care what I'm wearing or who I know. They just want someone to read them a story or hold their hand when they're scared. Victoria's voice cracked slightly. It's changing me being here. And I wanted you to know I'm truly sorry for how I treated you. Janelle studied the woman before her. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something humbler, more human. Thank you for saying that, Janelle said finally. It can't have been easy. Will you be at the gala next weekend? Victoria asked. I heard you're attending as Dr. Washington's guest. Janelle nodded. I am. We'll be there too, Victoria said. Not at the main table, of course. We've been reassigned. A small, rueful smile crossed her face. But Robert is helping with the community clinic project now. He's finding his way back to the values he grew up with. A nurse appeared at the end of the hallway. Miss Thompson, Dr. Washington is looking for you. He's in the conference room. I should go, Janelle said. Victoria nodded. Of course. As Janelle walked away, Victoria called after her, Miss Thompson. For what it's worth, my husband and I have been talking about setting up a scholarship fund for single parents in healthcare training. I thought you might have some input on how to structure it. Janelle paused, then turned back with a small smile. I might. Let's talk at the gala. As she continued down the hallway toward the conference room where Dr. Washington waited, Janelle reflected on the strange journey that had brought her here. One cruel moment had changed everything. But perhaps not just for her. Perhaps the ripples of that moment were changing Victoria too, breaking down the walls of privilege and prejudice that had isolated her from her own humanity. And that, Janelle thought, might be the most unexpected justice of all.